Hello, travelers, and welcome to Adventures in Security. This is episode 5 for June 8th, 2014, and I'm Tom Olzak, and I'll be your host. Today, we're going to talk about how the FBI can help with incident response and also incident prevention. We're going to talk about the use of Chinese-made hardware. This has been covered somewhat, and I want to take another look at it just because I had a conversation with a VAR over the last week, and this came up, and the customer really wasn't concerned about it. The question was, should the customer have been concerned about it? And I also want to talk about incident response within the context of the Target breach. Target apparently did not handle it correctly, even though they knew the breach was occurring, or they could have known it was occurring. So we're going to talk a little bit about how not to handle an incident. Normally on these netcasts, I talk about the next section of the book that I'm writing. However, I didn't get much done on the book this week. My son got married yesterday, so it's been pretty hectic. I should have known better. So we're just going to cover news and cover the incident response for Target as our risk management help topic for today. So let's talk about the FBI. Most people think of the FBI as a law enforcement operation. They don't really think about it as someone you can bring in to help you to try to prevent crime or to help you to respond appropriately to an incident when it occurs. In a Corporate Counsel Weekly article by Jay Odom, the FBI is encouraging organizations to invite them in and to let them help test the posture, take a look at your security posture, and give advice on maybe things that you can do better to either prevent, detect, or respond to a breach. This is a good idea. And the other thing too is a lot of organizations are hesitant to get law enforcement involved when there is a breach. Well, what this article is, the FBI in this article is encouraging organizations to get the FBI involved early. The FBI can help not only with mitigating business impact, but also with going after the threat. So, in my opinion, organizations are too slow. They need to get the FBI or local law enforcement involved. If it's physical security, local law enforcement is fantastic. Get them involved early. Have them come out. Take a look at your facility. Get to know it. Get to know your local law enforcement personnel, so that when something comes up, you're not at a loss for who to call, and the law enforcement organization is not at a loss for how to respond. For an online attack, it's usually the FBI that gets involved. Get them involved early. Help them to help you. Let them come in and help you to take another perspective, a law enforcement perspective, at how you have security set up. I'm sure you have been penetration tests being conducted at least annually. But pen testers aren't necessarily law enforcement focused. The FBI is. So it wouldn't hurt to have them come in. And from what I can tell here, it's not going to cost you anything but time. The next thing I want to talk about is the use of Chinese hardware, and is it high risk? In a July 2013 article in the Australian Financial Review, the author claims that intelligence and defense services in the US, Australia, Britain, Canada, and New Zealand had banned the use of Lenovo products for use anywhere where intelligence information, anything classified as secret or top secret, was going to be processed, was passing through, being stored, etc. In fact, the article claims that British and Australian researchers found, and I quote, malicious modifications to Lenovo's circuitry beyond more typical vulnerabilities or 0 days in its software were discovered that could allow people to remotely access devices without the user's knowledge. The alleged presence of these hardware backdoors remains highly classified. So, okay, Lenovo now has IBM's old laptop division, and now they have their servers. So, is it really a problem? Should organizations be concerned about purchasing and implementing Lenovo hardware? Well, first, there's been no evidence of any breaches or any attacks against any organizations via the firmware or the applications on a chip that are in the Lenovo systems. There could have been something in there at one time, but again, there's no evidence that anything that Lenovo has done anything or the Chinese have done anything through the hardware to breach an organization or a government. And why would they use that? The Chinese are very, very competent at using users and other methods, other attack vectors to get into our systems. So why would they try to put malware in the firmware, which let's face it, researchers are combing over on a regularly because it is the Chinese. So I don't think the Chinese would put something that obvious on a system and then try to steal information. The only way I can think that of happening would be for a one-off and for a quick return or a quick theft of something that was very highly classified, something they didn't want to take a chance on getting the users involved. They wanted to get in, get out with absolutely no evidence. The problem with that is, even then, there's always evidence left behind that there was something in the system that shouldn't have been there. The firmware, unless they can somehow rewrite the firmware on their way out, it's always going to be there. So, in my opinion, I don't believe the Chinese are going, or any other unfriendly government is going to try to expose themselves by using firmware in popular hardware. I think instead of worrying about that, businesses should worry more about putting together their general business or the general security frameworks as recommended by the standards of best practice, and not worry about whether they're buying Lenovo, Dell, or some other brand of hardware. Does this mean that I'm saying that national defense secrets and highly sensitive intellectual property should go ahead and be stored or processed on Lenovo systems? No. There is a risk that based on the fact that the Australians and the British believe that there was malware put in the firmware at one point, there is a risk. So a business is going to have to determine whether or not the risk is too high. And in my opinion, I don't think it would be unless you're handling national defense secrets or intellectual property that is of such a nature that if stolen by the Chinese, it would give them a huge step forward in technology. So that's my 2 cents. And if you don't agree, you can always email me at the address below, and we can discuss any comments or concerns that you have in the next netcast. So finally, I want to talk about the target failure. Apparently, and if you want to see the discussion from where I got this information, it's available at the link below. It's a good interview. It's a good discussion about what happened at Target and what should have happened. Apparently, Target had all the controls in place it needed to detect that there was an attack in progress. The information was collected by their detection controls, reported where it should have been reported. The problem is that the people who are supposed to be watching for these things either didn't see it or didn't know how to react to it. So let's take the first one, didn't see it. If you have a let's say it was a security information and event management solution. If you have something that's collecting logs and is correlating events across your network and reporting those back to a portal, somebody needs to be looking at the portal. When I was doing this, when I was director of security, I had an on-call person every day, and one of that person's jobs was to have the portal up on one of the monitors on his or her desk continuously, and to always be looking for alerts and unusual activities being reported by the portal. That's absolutely necessary. If you have a portal and you're not looking at it, then it's useless. If you have alerts being sent and no one is looking at them, they are useless. So it's not just enough to throw out a control and say, okay, we have it there. Some companies do, and I'm not saying Target did this, but some companies do this so they can claim compliance. Again, compliance is not security, as evidenced by this. I mean, for example, the federal government is supposed to be, all the agencies are supposed to be putting in something to detect real-time activity, correlating events on their networks and having that information reported to them. If they take the same approach Target did, so what? It's not going to really do anything. So that is, the users didn't see it. And now we're going to talk about the security people didn't know what to do with it. Incident response teams need to be trained. And that starts with the people who are actually receiving the alerts and the information from the security incident and event management systems. There need to be policies and processes in place, and they need to be practiced. The incident response team, the initial alerts, the people need to know how to react to those. They need to practice how to react to those. And then the team that they will be reporting this to also needs to have processes in place to vet the alerts that come up and to respond to them in a way that significantly mitigates business impact. And the only way you can do that is to practice. I've seen many articles over the last couple months. People are getting more concerned about incident response. And the reason for that is there's no way to stop all attacks against your network. It just isn't going to happen. So you need to plan for the inevitable. You need to plan for the breach when it occurs. This includes, again, detecting it as quickly as possible, hopefully as far away from the target as you can. Vetting it quickly to determine whether or not it's a valid threat or not. Reporting it appropriately to the response team, and the response team responding in a way that's practiced and documented. Now, when I say responding in a documented way, and I have managed my share of incidents, I believe that the processes get you started, but once you get going, once all the information starts coming in, you start asking the right questions, then you start deviating from those processes significantly sometimes. So a little flexibility is required. That's why training is necessary. That's why the team has to know how to work together, knows when to deviate from the processes, knows how to make decisions, knows what questions to ask. All of these things need to be handled. There has to be second nature to the team. These aren't things where an incident is not a situation where you sit down in a conference room and spend an hour discussing what the next steps are. By that time, it can be over, and your date is gone, and business impact is significant. Your customers aren't happy, your management's not happy, shareholders aren't happy, and it could have been avoided. Again, it should be second nature to your response team what to do when an incident is reported to them. So I know it's a little short this week. I will lengthen the netcast next week. But until then, be careful what you click.